Good afternoon and welcome to the Connecticut State Department of Education and Connecticut Recreation and Parks Association webinar highlighting municipal child care programs to support school families. Just as a reminder for those of you on the call, you are in listen-only mode. However, we welcome your questions. You can type them into the question box and our panelists will address them at the conclusion of the session. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be posted to the Connecticut State Department of Education website. I'd like to turn it over to Chris Soto from the Connecticut State Department of Education. Chris.
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon to everyone. We really appreciate you taking some time this afternoon to hear from our panelists. We know it's been a challenging time as we talk about childcare for families, as it's been such a dynamic school year. As districts move in between in-person, hybrid, and remote settings. So we definitely wanted to open up this opportunity to share some best practices that we've been seeing in the state and really commend all the communities that have been innovative in the way that they're supporting their families. And so again, I also want to thank the Connecticut Recreation and Parks Association for stepping up and helping us with this, and also the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, who also had the desire. And then lastly, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. So we also have two great communities that are doing great work on opposite sides of the state, which I think are going to give you a nice flavor of some differences and some best practices that you can try to implement if this is something that you're trying to do. So with that, we have our facilitators and panelists. And so I'm going to just ask if we just go down this list that you see on your screen to briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Valerie Salfi-Collins, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Rec and Park Association, and you'll be hearing from me a little bit later.
Hi, I'm Myrna Martinez. I am the chair of the long-term recovery team, the education committee for the long-term recovery team.
Hi, I'm Sharon Bousquet. I work for the New London Recreation Department as the Assistant Director.
Good afternoon, Christine Carver. I'm the Superintendent of Bethel Public Schools.
Hi, I'm Eileen Earl. I'm the Director of the Park and Recreation Department in the town of Bethel.
And good afternoon, I'm Deborah Johnson. I am the Licensing Director at the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood. We oversee the licensing of childcare programs and youth camps.
Excellent. Well, we're going to get right into it. Thank you again to our panelists and facilitators who are here with us. And we're going to, like I said, just go over the agenda briefly. So we have, gave a little bit of the overview and context of today and why we're doing this. We have two communities, New London and Bethel. We also have Val, who's going to kind of share her perspective from a statewide level. And then Deb is going to talk to us about some other considerations from the Office of Early Childhood. So we'll jump in right in and let New London take it away.
I'm sorry, Sharon, are you starting here?
Sure. I can give you a perspective from the New London Recreation Department, and then Myrna can piggyback on that and tell you about her position and how she has done it from a different angle. So the New London Rec Department decided that we were going to jump on board and assist the school department right from the get-go. About midsummer, we had started talks, and we brought in all of the agencies that we knew that were considering to support the hybrid school model, the Drop-in Learning Center, the BP Learning, and the NESS, New England Science and Sailing from New London, that we knew were a possibility. So we brought them in and kind of talked about what was going on in New London and how we could best support the kids in that hybrid situation, and definitely working families that we knew were going to have a need. They had nowhere to bring their kids while they were working. It's huge in New London. There's a lot of families that are in that service organization where they had to be at work, as opposed to having the luxury of being at home while their kids, they could work from home. So we set out right away to try and set that up. Our biggest problem was a facility, and we luckily came across Ocean Beach, who wasn't using their banquet facility. That was that was key for us. They weren't using it and they were willing to let us use it. And typically we use Ocean Beach, which is it's a city-owned property. We usually use it for free, but in this case, they worked out a contract with our finance department where we were actually paying them and worked it through FEMA reimbursements and different grants and stuff to try and support them as well. So they were on board and we were able to immediately start launching applications for teachers to get teachers on board and advertising the program. We decided to set it up where we were maxed out at 60 kids and we set up 6 different groups of 10. So our goal was to be in a group of 1 to 10, 1 teacher per 10 kids. We had a huge ballroom space that we divided up into 4 sections with walls where kids were no closer than 10 feet apart per table. 15 feet apart, with each table being about 8 feet with 2 kids at a table at each end. So huge distances between the kids and teachers. We had been through the whole summer and what was required in terms of masks and all that and cleaning. We had been through summer camp, so it was very easy to piggyback on that with all the COVID procedures and what we needed to do. So Ocean Beach became kind of our area. It's again huge area, so we were able to do the same drop-off procedures outside where the parents were not coming into our program. We had a person outside, a supervisor that took the kids right from their car and they went right into the program and met the teacher. Same thing with pickup. Parents stayed in their car and we brought the kids right out. It was the biggest obstacle we encountered, similar to any program we have. We had the internet was probably the biggest thing that we came across because we had to have that done 2 weeks ahead of time. So we had to have a wider bandwidth than what was normally down at Ocean Beach, and they agreed to come in and do that, but we had to commit to a year-long contract. And I'm sure as all of you know, when we started all this, it certainly wasn't expected to be year-long. We knew it was a possibility, but we didn't know how long it was going to be. So that was all we started on. As soon as the school started school, we started our program that at the same time, kind of as a, I guess to see how many kids were interested, we had to start somewhere. And I think Myrna can kind of pick up from there. They're hoping to expand that out and get more kids, but ours had to be self-sufficient for our model because we didn't have funding at that time. And again, we had to start somewhere, but they're looking to expand it out and kind of run with it from there.
So it's funny, very to the topic of what we're talking about. The reason I asked you to start is because my kid started banging in the basement because we are all dealing with these types of situations. So I decided that it was a good time for me to stay on mute meanwhile. So as the New London decided to take on, I guess, the challenge, I'm going to call it, that Governor Lamont requested from municipalities with the long-term recovery team, and chairing the education committee for that team, our charge was to identify the gaps in this time of emergency. One of the out of a number of the gaps that we found that were emerging during this time, one of them being, as Sharon said, internet service. We were finding that a number of families did not have internet service and were driving to certain locations to access service that we were told that it was available in town, like in school parking lots in certain areas. This created a challenge for some families. We have in our committee, it's a fabulous committee. We have representatives from higher education, from the public schools, from preschool. It's a real parents. It's a really great team. And someone from the preschool ages told us of examples of stories of families who, let's say, have 4 children going in their car with a preschooler, a middle schooler from one school, another middle schooler from another school, an elementary student, and sitting in a parking lot trying to get schoolwork done. And it just was not something that was really doable, that was going to last, they were going to sit there and get it all done. So internet service was one of our main areas of concern, thinking about hubs or places indoors where kids can actually stop inside and get their work done. From there, some of the other areas were academic support and mental health. And so the conversation, I guess, expanded into learning hubs was something that could take care of these multiple needs. We were also noticing that in different areas, different communities, that families were creating their own learning hubs or their own pandemic pods is what some people call them. And so some families with means were hiring teachers, hiring tutors, setting up areas in their backyard or in their house in order to have a select, isolated group of students with someone to be able to work with them through their distance learning. This is something that many of our families cannot afford even at the most basic level. And so we're concerned about the opportunity gap broadening and what we can perhaps do to help decrease the breadth between that gap a bit. And so the learning hubs here in the community, we were noticing that, yes, the rec department had started up with this since the beginning of the school year. BP Learned has also has a number of pods. I think they have 3, 2 elementary and 1 middle. No, I'm sorry, that's a drop-in learning center. BP Learned had 2, had space for 1 other, but did not have the funding, the staff to actually open up the 3rd classroom that they did have space in. Nest is also providing services. Mitchell College said that they were willing to work with us and perhaps provide students to work with a hub. And so, here we are growing this model, wanting to have an integrated collaborative approach for this community effort, because I think the way that it's working still right now, we just got Sharon just hired a learning pod coordinator for the entire area to be able to collaborate and to coordinate with the different areas, different places that are providing services for these distant learning days, to be able to communicate with families, with school, with services, fill in more of those needs.
Great. I do, this is definitely making me think about some questions off the bat, but we're going to save the questions. We're gonna jump to Bethel unless there's anything else that New London wants to kind of share about their program. No? All right, great. Well, Bethel, take it away.
So I'm going to start for Bethel, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eileen. So Bethel took a different approach when we were considering what our needs were going to be for the coming year. We've had a long-standing relationship with our Park and Rec department, and we probably started it was when I first started in Bethel. I think it was after the first year, so it's about 5 or 6 years ago, where the Park and Rec department actually took over and provided our before and after care programs for our community at large. It had been previously run by the district, but over time, what we were finding is that we didn't have the capacity as a school system to be able to manage both the school day program and the after program. So Eileen and her team stepped up to the plate, and I guess that's the basis of where the relationship started. But as COVID approached, one of our biggest concerns certainly were families that particularly in the hybrid situation, or if indeed you're on distance learning and childcare in the community is certainly an issue, and we can talk about how we had tried to address that. But also one of our most pressing needs was staff. We knew that we probably couldn't run our school system because we would have so many educators that were impacted by not having care for their own children to be able to work and provide an education for the other children of Bethel. And we also knew, so just to be clear, we're in full now in Bethel. So we're in 5 days a week, K-8, but we did what's called I call it a transition to full, where we were implementing our mitigation strategies and kind of learning the new routines as we were implementing them in the schools. So we approached the Park and Rec department at that point to offer a daycare program for our staff, which we did house at one of our elementary elementary schools. So we started with 2 classrooms, and I'm not even sure if we need them now because of the fact that most of the schools in this region, at least, are back full time for elementary level. We were able to provide all of the mitigation strategies that we typically do in the classroom settings. But Eileen, do you want to jump in and just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was really key about having this at the schools because the teachers, our complex is awesome because it's all in one location. So if a teacher was at the high school, she was easily able to drop her child off at the elementary school where the hybrid program was, is held, and which was really key because then they didn't have to drop them off too early, and then they were able to pick them up fairly right after school, which was key to us to know what all these students were. And we had about 18, 20 kids throughout the 2 cohorts that would come, like 8 would come on one day and 8 on another day. And we were fortunate we had staff that had worked with the school system through our theater program that we had on staff that we took right in to become the teachers, and had some college kids that worked for us for the summer. So we were able to keep the kids in a school setting, which kept the routine great for the kids when they went from being in the regular classrooms to come into our program at the elementary school. It kept a nice routine, and then they knew how to log in because it was the same as school and everything. So I think it was the relationship that we have with our school system and the way our complex is, it made it a lot easier for teachers to be able to feel comfortable dropping their kids off. It wasn't taking another half an hour of their day to get their child to grandma's house or something. And they were able to have a regular day of school learning outside, their lunchtime. So it kept it really as a normal day for all those kids, and we of course know we're all in full time now, but that could always change, and our staff is available to come back in. And we did have some outside of district teachers that teach in Bethel, but have kids that go to other school districts, and they were able to come into the program as well. When Bethel went full, we were probably the first town, I think, in this region to go full. Within the week, surrounding towns have been back to full, so we presently now do not have any kids in the hybrid program. And so we're hoping we stay that way.
Yeah, and we continue to maintain our before and after care program for our parents throughout the community. So a lot of the things that New London mentioned in terms of internet, even access to our cafeteria, having the program in the schools, I think has facilitated and eliminated a lot of those barriers. And maintaining all of those programs has been, I think, advantageous as we look to provide supports not only for our community but our schools. In addition, part of what I did on the side, apart from Park and Rec, was work with some community providers who were, quite frankly, really struggling for COVID. And there were a number of programs that popped up throughout the community that, in Danbury Sportstone, they're actually not running right now because most people are back in, is an example of it, where they had a facility where they could, and they weren't getting the typical business that they would. So they offered a hybrid program for our families, which I think is advantageous for a school system, particularly as you're going in and out based on the community mitigation or the community infections. So I think that's it, Chris.
Great, thank you, Christine and Eileen. We're going to shift now to Valerie, and I'm going to come back to slides.
I have a lot of them. First, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of where I got this information that I'm going to be covering. I talked to a lot of our members that have run hybrid programs, including New London, who's, Sharon's done a great job. And then Bristol, West Hartford, Haddam Killingworth, Suffield, all of who jumped in to do these hybrid programs immediately. I know we run camps and we run before and after school programs, but we really have shown through COVID how essential we are with our childcare programs to help our communities with that need, because there's obviously shortages. And during these hybrid programs, I have a unique perspective. I know what it is on the parent side, but then I know what a hard lift it is for the school systems and Park and Rec to run these programs, because I do have a son that's actually in kindergarten now who's doing hybrid 1 week on and off. So a lot of these things that the Park and Recs have given me, I actually lived through as well. So their insight immediately resonated, and I wanted to share with you guys these details, because if you're planning on doing one of these programs, the devil is in the details. So the first two main aspects are or hurdles that you need to get over are, do you have enough facility space? If you don't, you obviously can't run the program. And now with OEC's new guidance, it's 18 children per room, but I know maybe Deb will speak about the actual parameters for 18 and how you can get from the 16 to 18. But once you meet that, and then having at least double that space on Wednesdays, given the fact that most districts don't have programs in school on Wednesdays, so you usually see double your enrollment on Wednesdays. And then once you hit that facility space, you have the Wi-Fi capacity for all of these children. If you're going to have 40 children in your building, you know, maybe 10 per room or 15 per room, can all of them be on Zooming with their teachers at the same time? And if they're not Zooming with their teachers, on other programs using apps that are needed to put assignments, send assignments to their teachers. So getting proper Wi-Fi bandwidth is very important, getting boosters if needed for those rooms. And then checking with your local school districts to see if you can borrow hotspots from them, maybe even your libraries if they have hotspots. I know, Bethel, you had mentioned that you had hotspots and were willing to work with Park and Rec to get them. So I thought that was key. And then New London had mentioned to me that they needed to get their facility internet because it didn't have it, and it was a 2-week lead time. So getting on that with your local cable company is very important to do. One of those first steps is important to do. After those two hurdles, the biggest hurdle is probably staffing. I've heard that from every single one of my members that is running hybrid programs is trying to get the staff to manage these programs. It is much different than staffing for camp. You need adequate staff to log in multiple children on multiple different apps all at the same time. I have a kindergartner, he cannot log himself in. It's not that easy. And then you need staff to be with the children that are Zooming to make sure they're sitting quietly and not interrupting each other, but the ones that aren't, to take on energy breaks or to do an activity with to keep them occupied. You need to be able to assist these kids when they're not Zooming with reading and writing and math problems, many of which are younger grade levels, so they can't even read. Kindergarten first graders need a lot of help with, the directions for the worksheets they're given. So it's really at times when you're seeing the younger kids almost 1-to-1 during various times of the day. And be prepared with substitutes. I mean, you're going to have people that either get sick or have doctor's appointments or, different family things that come up. So having enough adequate staff to substitute in as well. And then obviously likely double the staff for Wednesdays, since you're likely having double the kids on Wednesdays. Most districts are Wednesdays, nobody's in school because they're scrubbing those schools down, or they're getting out early in my district for professional development, so nobody's Zooming at all on Wednesdays. So after you hit the facility space, the Wi-Fi, and the staffing hurdles, I would say communication is then key. And communicating with both the parents, but that open communication with the schools, I think, is key as well. And before you run your program, maybe talk to your school principals or superintendent and say, what supplies would I need per grade level? And purchase extra of those supplies. Talk to parents, get the kids' Zoom schedules prior. Talk to the parents about what teachers require for their classrooms as far as extra supplies as well. I know one of the big things I heard from my members was requiring parents to preload all of their Zoom meetings to their Google Meet calendar so that your staff can easily go on that person's device and just pull it up. I know I'm always in a rush when I'm getting my son on his Zooms. I just pull up that Google Meet and press the button. It's easy to do. So I would say requiring parents to preload the apps and preload those Google Meet calendars into their devices. And then get everything in writing from the parents for schedules as well as a backup. And then New London had a great kind of tip: create a notebook for each child or a binder for each child, and then the staff and the parent can communicate in that binder. the parents can write down, this is what the work assignments are for the day and the week. And then the staff can write on there, yes, we've completed this, or no, this is what you need to do at home. Or even just different behavioral things like he was great today, or, we had a little trouble listening today. It's easy to communicate with parents that way rather than the chaotic drop off and pick up. Technology, I would require the parents to preload the school required apps and auto save the passwords. And then as a backup in that binder you create for each kid, maybe get the devices that they're using, the device passwords, and then each app that they're required, which each of those app passwords. My son has 4 apps. So and many times you're not picking the passwords, they're giving it to you, which are these big, long, ridiculous numbers and like letters that you can never remember. So getting a backup of those, and then if you can auto save those passwords in the app, having the parents preload the apps and auto saving those passwords in each of the apps, but having a backup in writing in those binders that you create. That would be, I think, key for time saving and especially to help mitigate craziness during the chaos of trying to get the kids on the right programs at the right time. Supplies, ensure you have extra age appropriate supplies on hand. I know I talked about that with communicating with your schools, but many times, and I've done this as a parent with my son at home and Zooming with his kindergarten teacher, they'll like randomly name, grab your this, and then you're like, oh, rushing to try to find it, or oh, we don't have that in his box of supplies. So talk to the parents, talk to the school districts about what supplies that those grade levels will need, and have them brought in maybe by the parents and labeled with the names, and then have a supply box per kid with their supplies in that box that you can just put next to them while they're Zooming. And obviously then you're not having to sanitize anything because they're not sharing the supplies. Each kid's box is their individual supplies. Ask parents to fill out a form listing the supplies the teachers requested for home use, and then obviously bring those in and label them. Have extra Chromebook, iPad chargers, and headphones on hand. Many times parents in the chaos of, packing backpacks for the morning will forget to bring the charger with the Chromebook or the iPad. So have a few on hand so you can, charge those at the program if they forgot them. And then something that I think was an interesting thought process was have extra scholastic, artistic, athletic, or even ask the parents to add extra educational apps to their devices so that those kids that aren't Zooming or have done their work faster than the other kids have something that they can do to keep them occupied while the other kids are working. And then a lot of what I was told is a lot of times there's not a ton of work given for the kids to do on Wednesdays because it's seen as like a catch-up day, or the kids aren't Zooming, so they don't have to do things to then present on Zoom later. So, and a lot of times Wednesday have extra activities to do, or group activities, socially distant, that you can do with the kids to keep them occupied. And then some other considerations would be use the virtual learning time as a math break and sit the kids socially distant from each other so that they can have that break from wearing masks. And a key thing too in a lot of the programs are to emphasize to the parents both before and during the program, before they sign up for the program, but then during the whole program as well, that your staff are not teachers. So they're there to help facilitate the child, learning when they need help and with accessing that technology for the teachers, and they will do their best to help, but they might not know how to do all of the math or know how to appropriately teach your child to read. So just emphasize they'll do their best, but they in the end are not teachers and are not tutors. And then prepare for multiple ages and grades in one location. With many times in the same location, you're going to have different attention needs in the same room or different staffing level needs in the same room because of the age ranges. So I think those were the key takeaways from a lot of our members, so that you guys, if you are looking to start these programs, you don't have to learn these the hard way on week 1 or day 1 and 2, and you can try to think ahead and prepare ahead to mitigate some of those fires. Anybody have any other questions or move on to OEC?
Thank you, Val. That was great, and again, got some good leading questions to get us going once we do move to that. But want to turn to Deb, who can get us going on some OEC considerations.
Sure, thank you. One thing to remember, unlike many of the other states, in one respect, Connecticut was positioned well when this happened, when schools were going back. hybrid models, not a lot of distance learning. We have an exemption, as I'm sure most of you are all familiar with, that is allowing municipalities and public school systems to administer their own childcare programs. A lot of other states didn't have this, so they had to create waivers. We already had that set up. So the allowance for municipalities and public school systems to run childcare programs is nothing new in Connecticut. The one thing to remember about that exemption, if a program is operating under that exemption, is it does require that the program notify all the parents that the program is not licensed by the Office of Early Childhood. So you want to be sure that notice is given to parents, I think primarily so that if they have concerns or questions, they know who to go to about that program. During COVID, many of you know, the Office of Early Childhood has issued many requirements really to limit the spread of the virus. And these requirements that the office has issued, this guidance is for all programs, whether they're licensed or licensed exempt. So these all apply to all the municipal run programs and public school programs. All of these are posted on our website, the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood, which is www.ctoec.org. And if you go to the section on COVID, you'll find a list of many different memos that we've issued. In particular, I would draw your attention to memos 6, 15, 18 if you're a camp, and 29, because these really lay out the enhanced requirements that need to be followed. They're continually changing, so I would tell everyone to visit the website frequently. Those requirements include, Valerie mentioned group size, and this has changed over time. It was 10, it was 14. The requirement now is 16, but as of Monday, there was an additional allowance that a program could have in a group in one space up to 18 children. And if you're going to have 17 or 18, you need to have in that space 50 square feet per all the children in that space. There's no additional approval that is necessary for a program to do that. They just need the space. So that's one of the requirements. There's requirements for health screenings when all children arrive. There needs to be health screenings. It used to require a temperature check. That is no longer required. Many programs have chosen to continue to do that, and that's certainly allowable. Masks has been a big thing. Masks for staff has been in place for a long time. Masks for children age 3 and up is fairly new. That requirement is in memo 29. So it talks that children need to wear masks. The memo goes into detail about exceptions to the requirements and breaks from the requirement when they're napping, when they're eating, when they're outdoors. So there are breaks that can be put in place so that children, can have those breaks. Increased hand washing, that's always been a requirement. Respiratory hygiene as far as covering coughs and sneezes. Enhanced cleaning practices, and social distancing. All of those should be practiced at all times. So all of that information is on the OEC website. We've also, you'll find with the memos, our frequently asked questions, and there are a lot of them, but a lot of the questions, most of the questions you have probably been answered there. And then the childcare guide, we have a guide that talks about childcare centers, and it has taken the requirements and gives some strategies on implementing these in the programs. So that can all be found on our website. All of the documents, the memos are being updated. For example, the most recent changes in group sizes, we're in the process this week of updating the memos to reflect that. And then if anyone has questions, we have a help desk during business hours, and that number is 860-500-4450. And I know these programs aren't licensed, but you still have a lot of questions about what the enhanced requirements during COVID are. And that's a number that you can call and get those answers. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you, Deb. And I want to actually just kind of put a fine point on this idea that these new programs are not licensed, but they do have to abide by the requirements that are put forward. So I think that's an important distinction that people should make when they're starting up programs, so that way they know. But with that said, if there's a concern that someone, whether it's someone in the district or it's a parent, has, because they're not licensed, who should they direct that concern to about the program?
If it's a question about the enhanced COVID requirements, the requirements that the Office of Early Childhood has put out, I would direct them to call our office at that number, the 500-4450. That would be the first place to start. We would follow up on that complaint. If it's a complaint about the policy or the general operation, they should go to the municipality or the public school system that's administering the program.
Great.
Yeah.
And so this question I'm going to direct to Val, specifically around age, and we can bounce to also the cities, but where are you seeing the biggest need when it comes to age bands for the childcare?
Sure. From what I've heard from my members, it's the elementary school age. There are some 6th grade, 7th grade needs, but they're much smaller than the elementary school aged. But yeah, it's like kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then a smattering of 6, 7.
And is that what you're seeing in New London and Bethel?
It is in
London.
Bethel. Sorry.
Sorry, no.
I would say that of course, just on basic childcare, that who's old enough to stay home or not old enough to stay home alone, but that actually really concerns me, and I don't want to dismiss the needs, like I said, of the mental health and the academic support that's needed. In other words, the motivation, thinking of, you have adolescents who are home day after day and don't have the academic support. Not every family can help with the chemistry, the algebra 2, the calculus, whatever it may be. And it's an important piece that I don't know the community of Bethel, but in the community of New London, I mean, graduation rates are something that are really important. I'd actually be curious, not to just maybe to put in the parking lot. I'd be curious, Christine Carver, just because you were an administrator in New London, what do you see as areas that are working that may not, or that would be more of a challenge in New London, of how we might need to do something differently that is working for you? Because in hearing your program, there are pieces that are like, oh wow, that's great. I didn't think that was a possibility here. This is what I heard here.
Well, demographically, we're your D, so it's much like Waterford, East Lyme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it definitely is demographically different, and I think you're absolutely accurate, Myrna, about that the support needs might be different in different communities, and I think I brought that up in our last call, Chris. And the levels of supports in communities really have to be driven by that community, and so I think what we talked about is forming the partnership, which I'm sure you do, forming the partnership with the school system to kind of make an assessment about what is it our community does need, what do our student body need, and then how can we help, because really it's a partnership. We benefit from the programs that our Park and Rec department and you are providing in New London. The New London Public Schools benefit from that. So really kind of working together to kind of try to define what it is and what the outcomes are and who needs the support and how they need the support and how it can be best provided is so critical, because context is so different, and not just from like a demographic perspective, but even resources within a community.
Yes.
I mean, the challenges that you're having with Wi-Fi, I mean, and I mentioned this to Chris, one of the things that we talked about was the state actually gave each district a survey to identify the families that need internet access. and they actually provided hotspots for districts. So the ability to have that conversation between whoever the provider is and with a school district can say, you know, we're working with these families and we know that they have internet issues, and we're making sure that they have those hotspots. Because in all communities that's true. But I guess I'm using that to illustrate a point, is that the communication between those two groups are going to be critical in the support of the students.
Sure. It's something as simple as you were mentioning spaces, holding some of these programs in the school. Well, we were told that we can't host anything else in the schools, but we do have much different, I'm guessing here, space requirements, because we're tight on space, as you know, our buildings here. And so therefore, as Sharon was speaking, trying to find the space in Ocean Beach, and that's another reason why it's important for us to collaborate with other organizations in order to spread out and be able to service the numbers that we need to service. And with the hotspots, I already shared the challenges with that. I was working with an undocumented family who didn't even know, that how they can get a laptop, what they can do.
Yeah, and I think, we were in a good, I don't know if this is a good position or not, but we were in a good position because we're in the process of two school renovations. So we had some space available, but I know that there are school districts, so I'll be honest, that are concerned about bringing outside groups into schools. But again, that's the conversation. Eileen and I had many conversations about how we were going to cohort kids and make sure that we're socially distancing, and how we were going to provide lunches for students who are in our facilities. And so I think it's about that open dialogue.
Chris, you brought up on your last point about providing meals for students, and I think it's important for us to address that on this call. And just, if you could briefly share from both communities, and even Val, if you've heard of other things that you don't hear from New London and Bethel, on how we're tackling food needs during the programs.
So in Bethel, and that's actually true across the state of Connecticut, the child nutrition programs is providing free breakfast and lunch for every child in the state of Connecticut. So what we're doing is, and that's whether you're in person or you're on distance learning. So what we're doing in Bethel is we're providing so obviously for our students that are in school, they're getting it in school, and they're getting breakfast and lunch as they need every day. But for those students that have chosen to be on distance learning, what we're doing is we're providing a window every day where students and their families can come and pick up breakfast and lunch. And we also set up a separate time in the evening. So for families who, for whatever reason, want their children on distance learning, but they're working and they're with grandma or they're with somebody else during the day, we have evening hours for those families that can come up and get that. During when we were just on distance learning, we served about 72,000 meals to our community, and it was something that I think was a big asset to the community.
Great. How about in New London? Does it sound similar, or any different nuances?
Yeah, definitely breakfast and lunch, same as given. They make hot lunches for the kids during the week, and we have to pick it up and bring it down to the program because we're not on site like they are, but same idea.
There's also situations of where there are busing locations, and so that it goes out into different areas in the community for those that don't have transportation.
Great. Well, we don't have any other questions, so I'll ask you to think about some kind of closing thoughts, and I'll just synthesize some key things that I heard here. Definitely in New London, that community partnership was huge, allowing them to get a space quickly and up and running. Also thinking about the academic and social emotional support that students need, I think is a great kind of point that program should be thinking about if and when things shift. And then in Bethel, I heard that school and rec relationship that was kind of created even before the pandemic really allowed them to move effortlessly and start this program. Staffing was a huge concern. And actually, the one question I did want to clarify for Bethel was, so you did say that you have teachers who kind of from other, is it from other communities that live in Bethel or vice versa? And so if you could just share is the program open to families beyond that, or was it just for school staff?
For our day program during this time, it was just for school staff. But they had children in other communities.
Right. Okay.
So they may be our staff, but their children go to the Danbury Public Schools.
Right.
So in our before and after care program, we've continued to run for our whole community.
And that's run separately out of the rec department as well?
Yeah, Eileen, do you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
it's run totally separate with everything coming through our office, and we pay for the staff and organize those daily staff and activities. So.
And I want to be clear, our staff pay for the daycare. So it's something that they're charged a daily fee based on their needs.
And I think that brings up, go for it.
Sorry about that, Chris, but just a couple on Christine and Eileen. You are not intermingling the before and after school with the hybrid learning cohort when you have that hybrid. You were keeping them completely separate to maintain the cohorts. They were not at points of the day due to staffing requirements, like kind of as people were picked up or leaving, like going into smaller groups for those cohorts intermixed, correct? I'm just curious how that works.
Right. So when they came on a cohort A, if they had before care and they had school, they went to before care. If they were cohort B and they were distance learning, they went straight to the hybrid program. They never mixed with the before A group. And so that always, hybrid always started at 7:15 as before care started. So we never had cohort A or B mixed in before or after care. Because if they were in hybrid, if a child was in cohort B, so he went to hybrid Monday and Tuesday, he would always stay in that hybrid room until the end of the day till he got picked up. He never went to aftercare at the same school, because we have two elementary schools, K to 2 and a 4th and 5th grade, and we had K through 5 kids there. So we definitely made sure that cohort A never mixed with cohort B in before and after care.
And
that's a hybrid program.
That was a challenge that I've heard some of our members with staffing constraints, having 2 staff when there's only 1 or 2 children left in a program, and then you can't mix that person into, the other room down the hall to put 5 back together while the parents are doing pickups at different times. These are very common questions my members that are running these programs are asking. How do I do that while I'm having these staffing issues? So that's just something, questions I have not been able to answer for some of my members that are running these programs.
Well, I think that what you should do is consult with your Department of Public Health, because listen, we try to cohort as much as we can, and you do it mostly for the contact tracing, right? And so we're very good about communicating. They keep track of who's there, but there at some point, it's almost impossible to completely do it. And so I think that that's a conversation with the Department of Public Health around, even if you have to, because let's be honest, kids are playing soccer together in the afternoon, and they're in baseball, and they're doing things in the community where cohorts are mixing all the time. And then they're coming to school, right? And so it becomes a bigger issue with the contact tracing piece of it. So I think it's a conversation I would tell your members to entertain with the school district, because there may be ways around it.
Deb, can you speak to that and how OEC advises different child care facilities? And I'm sure you've encountered this with the many facilities you guys oversee. So if you can give a little guidance on that, that would be very helpful to my members.
Right. It's definitely a challenge. And I think the reality is it's not going to happen 100% of the time. You do the best you can. And there's not I think programs, what everyone's thinking about is if there is a positive COVID,
right?
How well you're able to how well you've been able to keep everyone separate that will dictate whether your entire program has to shut down for 2 weeks or it's only a classroom. So I think the idea of having some discussion with local health is a good idea, because you can see how would they view it if there was a COVID, and what strategies might they have to help limit the exposure should that happen? Yeah.
There's no clear-cut, easy answer. I've just been telling my members, no, don't mix them. It just seems from a liability perspective, like, no, don't do it. But
you know, having done contact tracing, it comes down to, you know, the same old question: who's within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, right? And so what Park and Rec has done a good job at is they keep track of who's sitting near who, and so even if there is a positive case, we know a kid is in the before care program, we can go to Eileen and say, Eileen, like, who's been around this child, and we also keep logs of everybody who enters a room in our schools, and we write the name and the times, so that if there even is a question for contact tracing about who was in that space, then it's much more easy to kind of fetter through. So you know, I would definitely talk to the Department of Public Health, because I think it's something that is impossible to do 100% of the time, and my guess is that there's probably strategies that can be implemented to help identify who's in what space at what time and who's around those people.
so I guess for other considerations, then there needs to be, in addition to one of my slides, Chris, which is add a login at the door of the room, sign in and out, and the times they've been in there. So if you're running these programs, have a binder at the door for log in and log out time of that room to help with contact tracing. God forbid there is a case in your facility.
Absolutely.
So these devils are in the details, and that's what I think a lot of my members need. They know how to run camps, they know how to run these programs inside out and upside down. It's these different COVID specifications that they need to take into consideration, and then you add the learning piece and the zooming and the technology to it, which just adds these layers. And you want to prepare for all those angles before you start the program rather than during the program.
And assigned seating, Valerie, assigned seating too is
So I'd like to just add again to the difference of the communities. One of the that has been helpful for us is the collaboration with the Human Service Department, Human Service Long-Term Recovery Committee, their committee, but also the Human Service Director here, Jeannie Milstein, has just been amazing and really cares about this, and see how it connects to so many of the areas that she's working with. And I believe that was the contact here with Chris Soto. And on that same vein, something that's really important to us that we're still working on is looking for funding to be able to run these programs, because our needs are that great, whether internet service, space, scholarships for families, because even though our costs are the rec department has been able to keep costs low, it's still a cost that's large for some families. And if you have 3 kids in the program, it's an important need here that we're really still desperately working on, is funding.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I know we're running short on time, but I do want to hit this point. You know, number one, there was a question about what the hourly rate is that communities are paying staff, so just keep that in the back of your mind for a quick second. But regarding kind of broad funding for communities doing this work, you know, we have confirmed that the ESSER funding that came out to school districts is an expense that can be used for it. But I think the key there is it's dependent on the community, right? And as Chris Carver can tell you as a superintendent, you know, if she sees a need like that this is going to, you know, greatly impact daily operations, then, you know, that superintendent is going to consider whether or not they want to use some of those funds. Also, there are certain communities that benefit from community development block grant funding that was specific from COVID. And so, you know, I just encourage communities to really have these direct conversations with superintendents and municipal leaders to figure out what are the different pools of funding, because there's not going to just be one magic bullet with you know a duffel bag of money that's going to pay for the programs. It's going to require creative partnerships. Community foundations as well, I think, is another opportunity that communities can look at. And so if you could just briefly share, you know, what your hourly rates are for either it's an instructor, and I think New London said they have a coordinator as well. So if you could just share what the ballpark is.
For New London, we're at $17.50 for our instructors or teachers, if you will, and then it goes up. We have on-site supervisor, which is closer to 20, and then 25 for our coordinator.
I have no idea.
We did $20 an hour for staff, and then the person in charge was at like 23 or 24 an hour. So
yeah.
And Chris, I do want to say that we do have a fund with the Southeastern, or is it Eastern now, Community Foundation for this particularly, and that council did allocate $180,000 from the community block development grant for the learning pods as well. So yes,
That's great.
And we need deposits to that community fund though.
And then Chris, you had mentioned when we were prepping for this, so correct me if I'm wrong, that for CARES Act reimbursement through OPM, it cannot be employee only. It must be open to all residents. So if Park and Recs are looking at doing these hybrid programs, God forbid schools shut down again, you can't just do it the way, I'm sorry, Bethel, not to call you out, but for school employee onlys or town employee onlys, you must open it to all residents in order to apply for that funding, correct?
We don't use any of that funding to
Correct. I understand that. But Chris, is that the correct interpretation to tell my members?
Correct. So, and again, there's, not to get too in the weeds, but so there's kind of 3 different main funding streams that have come. You have the let's say CARES Act funding that was initially distributed to districts that can be used at the discretion, if the school district deems this is an allowable expense. Then there was money that came from the Office of Personnel and Management. This, as you said, there can't be any restrictions. And then you also have certain communities that have community development block grant funding as well.
And they can still charge for the program, but they can still charge a fee, like a weekly or daily fee for the program to apply for the CARES Act funding through OPM, but it can't, for anything that's not covered under those charges that parents would pay, they can apply for funding for reimbursement, correct?
Correct. And so there was one question, a last question that came in. Are these full day programs or they only follow school hours? And so it sounds like at a minimum they follow the school hours, and then in some cases communities have before and after school programs as well.
Right. That's what Bethel does.
We're 8 to 3.
8 to 3. Okay, great.
But the other programs such as BP Learn It, other programs, or the Drop-in Learning Center has different hours.
I think it depends on the community and how it's set up.
Great. Well, again, so we're at an hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time and our participants. So thank you again to everyone who's on this call for taking out the time, sharing your expertise. I think, more than anything, we just have to be flexible and patient in these kind of challenging times. Thank you again to OEC. Thank you again to Bethel, New London, the Recs and Park Association, Val, and then, of course, Michelle, who's behind the scenes making this all work. This will be recorded, and you can find it on our website, and we'll also distribute it out to the groups. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.